Hey, where am I? Wait. Kuromu? Blockus? Octron? Oh, I'm not talking. I'm thinking to myself. I guess these guys saved me. I should be grateful. They must have taken all of my stuff. And who is that behind Kuromu? Wait. Oh, that must be the person I revived. I have no idea what they're doing, but I hope it has a good effect. They are skilled with magic after all. I can trust them. Not that I have a choice. I'll just let them finish up. Alright, time to get out. I spent way too long in that tank. Wonder how long I was out for. Hey Kuromu, how's it going? How did the process go? Good to see you as well after whatever happened. Any ideas? You've created some form of magical item, I suppose. Alright, I'll go take a look. Repair talisman. Interesting item. I presume this was in the tank with me? Almost kinda like a tea bag, I guess. But restorative properties, huh? I wonder what else I could use this for. I'll have to experiment with it later, if you don't mind. Mind cleansing soap. Interesting idea. I'll have to give it a shot and see what happens. Oh, you've made a spa, huh? Not the first thing I'd expect to be putting in a little research lab, but, you know. I guess I'll get my stuff together and head on up. Maybe I could use a bit of a break, though I did just take a really long one involuntarily. Wow, they just dug it right into the wall. Kind of amazing how fast they were able to do that. I guess those little golem bodies are powerful enough to break things. Wow, this is a nice place. So I can just dip into the water then? Oh wow, oh this feels nice. Not even just physically, mentally too. And now if I were to use some of that soap, let's find out what happens. Oh, I felt a noticeable decrease in head fog. This stuff really works. I'll have to figure out how to manufacture this on my own. It seems to have crystallized my thoughts and turned them into a tangible form. I wonder if I can extract the good without falling for the bad. It's not like that insanity didn't produce some type of results. Wow, this is a complete explosion of new ideas in my head. I think I'm starting to understand how this soap works. I'm gonna need to make a lot more of it, or perhaps something better. I know magic's about the last thing I should be concerning myself with right now, but if I want to truly get my sanity back, I'm gonna need to do more magic. I'm currently on the hunt for mana pods. Mana pods are a growable form of essentia. Pure essentia, I should say. You'll find them littered across the world, in the primal aspects and herba, I believe. To get more complex ones, you're going to need to grow them next to each other to have the aspects mix. Note that this is from a Thaumcraft add-on, New Crimson Revelations, rather than the base mod itself, as Thaumcraft 4 had mana beans, but Thaumcraft 6 does not. To grow a mana bean, simply place it on the underside of a log within a magical forest biome. It has to be within the magical forest, it won't work otherwise. If two differing beans that can mix are planted adjacent to one another, they have a chance of mutating to form a new aspect. So if I were to plant Ignis and Air next to each other, I'd get Lux. Growth is kind of slow, and you can't use bone meal, but you can use the Lamp of Growth. Now, naturally, I want to be minimizing the amount of flux I'm producing, and there is an Essentia smelter better than the Thaumium one made of void metal. It's quite expensive, and it actually needs something I don't even have yet, a Primordial Pearl. But to get one, I'd need to make a lot of flux. Can't say I'm not concerned by that idea. You know, speaking of flux, my radar picked up something strange and, oh. Perhaps our adversary wants to tempt us. Unfortunately, no matter what, I have to get rid of this thing. It's too dangerous to leave it here. Well, I guess I got the thing I was looking for. That's something. But if I'm being invaded in my own area, not like this would be the first time. Before I get to using that void metal smeltery though, I'm first going to need to set up that mana bean farm, which means I'll need to make some lamps of growth. They're pretty easy to make, just an ember lamp, some essentia, and some basic components. I'll eventually want a flux condenser to get rid of the flux it's going to make from the smeltery, but for right now, it's what we have. So now I've combined Perdicio and air and I've made a vacuous mana bean. And I'll grow that to get more mana beans to make more, so that I can mutate more and eventually get the aspects I'm looking to produce. With enough lamps of growth, it doesn't take that long. On the topic of mass production of Essentia though, I have something I'd like to experiment with. I've made a Cognitio rabbit, and since it takes up all of the V's in the chunk, perhaps using some Alkahest to replenish it will make it grow its coats back faster. Spoiler, it actually doesn't. Contrary to what the book led me to believe. It actually allows you to have multiple rabbits in one chunk without them interfering with each other. But I guess I have an effective way of replenishing V's in the chunk, so that's something. Perhaps I'll be able to make use of that later. The actual farming of the mana beans is a bit of a process. Nothing can actually plant the mana beans except for a golem with a use seal. And this caused a lot of problems, but we're going to go through the process anyway. I'll spare you the details on the solution, and just tell you that I asked the new Crimson Revelations dev what to do, and I was told to install an add-on. First, I updated New Crimson Revelations, so there's a little bit of new content. More importantly though, I added Magiculture integrations, pretty much explicitly for a fix. I also had to download a slightly older version than the most recent. I got the oldest version that added the feature that lets Harvest Golems replant mana pods. So you know how with the Harvest Seal, if you have it harvest wheat, it'll replant the seeds? Now it does that for mana pods. So now that you know that, and I'll mention it again later when I actually install it, let's go over the complicated nonsense I did before that. Because this isn't one of my videos without me doing something stupidly overcomplicated. I'm using a flying golem for the harvesting, but for whatever reason it wants to use mana pods on the entire log regardless of if there's one already planted there. How do we fix that? By disabling the use seals with redstone, of course. But it's not that simple. We don't have any sensor blocks, so I'm stuck using vanilla observers. But those don't tell you if a block is present. Those only tell if there's a block update. Correct, they only tell you if there's a block update, which means I have to count the number of growth stages of the mana pod, and then disable the redstone circuit when it's reached the number of counts that tells it, hey, there's no mana pod here. All of that redstone's gonna take up a lot of space though. So to fix that, we're making an IC chip. So I'll make an IC workbench and I can explain how all of that works. The IC workbench, or integrated circuit workbench, effectively allows you to simulate redstone in a single block space. There are many different sizes available, but I'll just be going for the smallest one, as my planned circuit fits within it. You can place down the various components from the bottom bar, and they'll work the same way as they would in the actual world. You know, if you crafted the real components. Levers and buttons are explicitly for debugging purposes. You can manually turn on or off parts of your system, as well as manually put a pulse input. Erasing gets rid of things you put down, and alloy wire transmits signals. You can also insulate it to mark it to a specific color channel, and all of those connect to bundled cables which can transport all color signals at the same time through one wire, and then split them back out into the corresponding insulated colors. Next up, we have I/O ports. These are how things get in or out of the IC chip, you know, from the outside, since it wouldn't be very useful to have everything only operate from the inside. There are 3 types of I/O, simple, bundled, and analog. I'm not actually sure what analog does. I'm not sure what the analog I/O does, but the simple one will react to regular redstone signals, while the bundled one will only correspond to the color type that is present within the port itself. So if I had a white connector, I would only be able to hook up white insulated wires to that side. You'll also have to define whether it's an input or an output. Then we have all of ProjectRed's logic components. You have your basic gates and or not XOR, as well as things like NAND. But then you also have a lot of the more utility gates. You have pulse generators, timers, repeaters. I'm not here to go into what all of these things do. All you have to know is that it lets you do all of these things in a singular block space. So let's get actually building. Of course, I need to go over the actual circuit I wound up building. The component here that forces different states is the counter. That's the component with the plus and minus on it on the left. It increments by 1 every time it gets a signal, and then once it reaches its maximum, it outputs a signal to the bottom. I should say that the input on the top is connected to the observer on the outside. Then the repeater forces a delay. When the counter turns its signal on, the repeater delays it from reaching the AND gate, as I don't want it automatically turning off. Then the next time a signal is received, the repeater is already sending a signal through, it's reaching the AND gate, the pulse also activates the AND gate and the signal goes through and it hits the minus side, which has been configured to turn the counter back to 0. This is all going into an AND gate which reverses the effect of the circuit. So it is emitting redstone, or disabling, the use seal, when there's a mana bean planted on it. I should have mentioned that all of this is on a blueprint. You place it on the workbench, give it a name, and then you send it over to the IC fabricator, which will imprint it onto an IC chip when provided with all of the required components. It is a bit of a slow process though. Then surround that IC chip with circuit plates, and you have yourself an IC gate. The initial circuit did have a slight error. The growth stages aren't as what I thought they were. I actually had to make it grow on 6 instead of 5. If you really wanted, you could use the observer to check the number by just having it count into the counter. But anyway, I need to make sure that the block on top of the block the seal is on is powered. That way it won't activate more than one seal at a time. My finalized design did work for a little bit, but it also clogged up, which is why I didn't end up sticking with it in the end. I just wanted to show this stuff off, and I also got to show off the IC chips and stuff, so I'd say that was worth it. No, I would not try to recreate this yourself, though I guess this technically isn't a tutorial series. Now, with Ordo coming from Order Crystals from bees from last episode, Cognitio coming from the Jelly Rabbit that I had set up before, and the Alienis from Mana Beans that I'm growing at the farm, I can combine these three things to make more Santitizing soap. I also hooked up some comparators and redstone and seals to these ender chests, so that it's supposed to only feed the Essentia smeltery when it is low on a certain type of Essentia. In practice, well, the golem unfortunately takes full stacks of items at a time. You can limit it, but I'd have to use different seals for that, and we do have something a little better coming down the line. Still, I've managed to automate soap for the most part. It also requires a block of flesh, but I have enough flesh. I need large quantities of rare earths for upcoming projects. In order to get a lot more, I can make the Infernal Furnace. While I can forge an amber to get a lot of it, it's far more time efficient to just throw a bunch of ore into the Infernal Furnace, as I have plenty of unsmelted aluminum ore. Allegedly, clusters produce rare earths at a higher rate, but actually making them takes a while. All you have to do to use the furnace after it's constructed is throw a bunch of ores in through the top. It will then spit them out the front, so you'll want a hopper or hungry chest to pick up the spoils. Ready to meet the new and improved mana bean farm? Growth lamps are now increasing the growth speed of these beans, and I have added instrumentum to the list of essentia being produced. I have space for up to 6 types in this farm. I could technically make more if I wanted to put more in this chunk or just use a second chunk, but I think this is sufficient for now. I'll be adding more mana bean types over time, and I might have some of them on rotation if I just want some available for crafting. I definitely want instrumentum though, and I'll be making praying contatio soon as well. It's absolutely essential to have this stuff because the next thing we're automating is alchemical brass and thaumium. Setting up ender chests to produce the essentia is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to go through that. It's not that complicated to use logistics pipes to automate production of the ingots though. I've set up an ender chest on a satellite pipe, so it will send copper or iron to this ender chest. The filtered pipes will then take out the ingots and put them into the respective hopper, which then goes into the thaumatorium, and thusly produces the desired ingots, which of course are sent back via ender chest. And that's thaumium set up too. It's going to be important to have this stuff on autocraft because I don't feel like crafting this manually all the time. It gets very tiresome. I've also taken care of some of the other recipes like plates for all of these things. Now for some other autocrafting involving Thaumcraft things. You know what you need a lot of in Thaumcraft? Salis Mundus. Let's make some. Automatically. By using a machine buffer and a filtered importer, I can export Salis Mundus and the bowl and the flint, and then re-import the flint and the bowl from the chest. This allows for a loop, and it will go through all of the stocked crystals of redstone. It's a fairly simplistic system. I'm using the crystals I got from the Liquid Death, as it's easy to get lots of those. Most of my other crystal generation methods have kind of flopped, or at least haven't been producing the results I wanted them to. You know, I never actually harvested all of these crystals. They've disappeared and regrown because of that rabbit in the chunk above it, but since the rabbit has been inactive for a while, the Vs has regenerated at least, and the Alkahest tried to fix it, but for some reason it's stuck, and quite frankly I don't care anymore. So let's just harvest it for the fun of it. Seems like it made a few stacks of crystals. That's something, I suppose. Speaking of Liquid Death, if I hook up some slimes, I can get access to aqua. So I made another wrath cage to make a spawner for slimes. Do note that the third type of essentia that isn't Ira or Decidia will vary depending on the mob type. For skeletons, that would be Mortuous, but for slimes, it would be Alchemia. If you have mana beans, I would just make Ira mana beans and call it a day there. So let's get automating arcane mechanisms. As we saw before, I've already automated the components of this, so now I need to actually automate it. I can use the Arcane Crafter to automate crafting of Arcane crafting table recipes. It accepts crystals from the lighter side of the table, everything else can be hoppered in. What's annoying though is that order matters, and the ways to which I can enforce that order are kinda limited. What I decided on is using a chain of hoppers. I've also locked some of the slots by using a placeholder item, specifically from the mod to do this. The output is hooked up to the bottom of the table, and the hoppers only activate when there is an item in each of them. The golem is going to put the right item in each hopper. I come up with a better solution for this later, but for right now we're using the golem. I then hook all of these up on different channels to use an AND gate in the IC chip. Again, there's a better way to do this. But the fundamental idea of the system is that once all the hoppers are full, it fills up the crafting table, it crafts the item, and then it continues to fill up the rest of the hoppers again. It's also important to have a reset timer to make sure all the hoppers are locked again, and to have a bit of a delay on the golem filling the hoppers so that it doesn't make a misfire. Oh, and to explain what seals I used, I put a provide seal on the chest that all the items are sent to, and then I have stock seals whitelisted to the item in a quantity of 1 item. This way it enforces all of the hoppers only having 1 of each item. Limiting stock, huh? That sounds kind of familiar. So instead of a golem now for this next setup, I'm using ProjectRed. This will be for morphic resonators. The shape of the recipe is the same, but unfortunately the way the items are oriented is different, so I can't reuse the setups. Then, while I have it set up in the wrong chunk, I'm using a Thaumic dioptra to determine the amount of vis in the chunk, and when it drops below a certain limit, it will trigger the machine buffer to start making cobble and put that into the Alkahest, and that will replenish the vis in the chunk. So once I put it into the correct chunk instead of the wrong one that it's currently in, everything will work fine. Now that it's in the right chunk, I also have a turn off switch, to where if the amount of aura in the chunk is too low, it won't allow the crafting to happen. This way the system doesn't get gummed up if it runs out of vis. All that Thaumcraft automation had to have been for something, and that something is the Dimensional Perforator. By consuming Vidium Essentia, and placing 2 of these a specified number of blocks apart, it says 10, I would say the count is 9, either way look for the particles and you'll know you've done it correctly. It will generate a flux rift, safely, within the confines of where it is, though it's not going to stabilize the rift, so be careful. If you're just looking to collapse rifts for Primordial Pearls, this is what you want to do. Note that you have to scan a Primordial Pearl to unlock this research. But if everything's ready, I can start filling it up. You can turn it off with redstone if you want it to accumulate. Otherwise it will make a flux rift, which I can then collapse to try and get Primordial Pearls. Note that getting a Primordial Pearl can take a few tries. I'd make a bunch of singularities and maybe even make a backup and restore it if you don't get one. Now that I have the pearl, I can make a new rift and just use that to farm for flux seeds. Though again, be careful, you're not stabilizing the rift. I finally made something truly remarkable. A cleansing charm. This concentrates the powers of all those soap into just 1 item I can wear on my person. What's more is I don't even have to craft more soap, I just have to fill it with vis. I haven't filled any items with vis yet though. That's where the recharge pedestal comes in. It will draw in vis from the chunk and then infuse it into the item you place on it. So slowly, over time, my cleansing charm will clean the sticky warp from my mind. One of the things added by New Crimson Revelations when I updated it was Thaumic litmus paper. It will tell me the exact amount of warp I have of each type, as opposed to the sanity checker, which only shows a vague bar. I'll periodically check in to see how much I have over time. Hopefully by the end of the episode I'll be completely clean. So from what Kuromu told me, the latest villager I rescued was a baker. She might appreciate it then if I make her some type of confectionary. So let's get going with that. Making this isn't going to be easy though. I need a particular type of fruit that I don't have access to. I've kinda worked with plants and crossbreeding before, but now it's time to get deep into genetics. Real quick on the topic of things that can be genetically manipulated though, I'd like to automate my diamond bees a little better than I have. What I have now does work, but I looked into that charm that Kuromu made for me when I was recovering in the tank, and it seems like its restorative properties work on a lot more than just a damaged mind. To be clear, this has nothing to do with warp, I'm just making that up. I can make an alchemical chest, which Kuromu also told me how to make the covalence dust for it, and what it does is it restores the durability of damaged items. For example, damaged frames. So if I hook up the frame housings to an alchemical chest, I can use ProjectRed pipes to extract damaged frames, and then insert them into the chest where they get restored to full durability, and then get sent back to the frame housings. Now I can get a much higher yield of my bee products. To get started with genetics, I'm going to need a supply of both wheat and sugar. Conveniently, I also need those to make Jaffa cakes. But we'll get to the Jaffa cakes later. On the wheel of mods to automate things with, it's been a while since I used Steve's carts for anything, so I'll be making a Galgadorian farmer. Galgadorian tools don't take any durability damage, meaning that they effectively work forever. They're a little expensive and they are going to require some mob drops, but it's nothing you haven't seen me do before. To skip the boring details, I'm just going to tell you that I use the spawner, the industrial foregoing one that is, to spawn large quantities of magma cubes, ghasts, and blazes, and spiders, until I had all the rare mob drops I needed. I then crafted everything together in the cart assembler, and there you go, farming cart. Note that you'll at least need a reinforced hull to support the Galgadorian farmer. The farming cart has a range of 2 blocks away from the rail it's on, and it will plant the seeds for you. The solar engine on its own isn't enough, so it has a charcoal-powered engine as well. The cargo manager is being constantly filled with ProjectRed stock keeping to have charcoal and bone meal put in. I forgot to mention there's also a fertilizer in it, so there you go, that's what the bone meal is for. And then it sends the fuel to the fuel slot, the bone meal to the bone meal slot, and takes out everything from the storage, which is the wheat and the seeds. I also put a void chest down to void excess wheat and seeds so that the system doesn't clog up. Because charcoal is basically free, this will run perpetually forever. I also made a sugarcane farm using pistons and observers, but I think I can do better and upgrade that. Since pistons are a little messy and picking up the items from that is even messier, and sometimes it doesn't even get all the sugarcane, I've decided to use ProjectRed block breakers instead. You know, that stuff I wanted to use in that crystal farm that didn't really end up panning out. The mechanism isn't all that complicated. I've just hooked it up to a timer, and if the stock is over a certain amount, the timer won't go. As a note though, to have the redstone actually touch the pipes, you need to connect it with redstone wire going underneath the pipe. You can use framed wire if you'd like, to help it touch the ground, but it doesn't just raw connect to redstone dust. It will connect to things like levers though, I guess. Now that that's squared away, I promised to get into genetic stuff, right? Well, before we get into the actual genetics mod, I am doing something genetics related. I'm making an Escritoire. It lets you play a little mini game, which is basically just blind random guessing. I think there's a way to use hints or something, but Essentially, you put the desired sapling you want to crossbreed something with in the center, and you click on the question mark things around the outside until they match. If you get all of them on a particular board, you'll get a research note. I believe it's a random one, but it will always tie to the sapling bee, etc. that you put in the center. If you fail, you can just pick up the item and put it back in, and if you right-click with the research note, it adds a 5% chance for the particular mutation you want to happen. I don't know exactly how that works, but that's how it works. Now, when looking for mutations with these trees, the fastest way to expedite the process is to acquire pollen. I've already shown off the alveary sieve, but you can right-click on a leaf block to force a pollination to happen. You're still subject to the percent chance, though, that the mutation actually occurs, which can be slightly annoying when dealing with rarer trees like lemon. There's only a 5% chance you get lemon trees, and lemon trees are required on the path to get oranges. Smart people make a bunch of bee houses to do their mutations, as having more allows you to increase the mutation chance. Bee houses also increase the pollination chance as opposed to alvearies or apiaries, though since they can't be automated, they might not be your cup of tea. The butterflies that spawn will also help. Okay, there are more things we need to do to prep to do genetic work. I need to make ethanol. Ethanol is made from biomass in the still, and biomass is made in the carpenter with fertilizer and your choice of organic matter. If you're tree savvy, you can make saplings that have very high sappiness, which means they produce far more biomass than regular vanilla saplings. However, I have an absolute ton of spruce saplings, so I'm just going to use those because it's easier. We'll get to breeding better trees, I promise. That's what the genetics are for, but I need ethanol. It's a useful solvent, as well as a power source. Now I need to automate sugar production. Because there's no way to increase your yield with machines, I'm just going to use the Arcane crafter. See, now that I have Arcane mechanisms automated, making more of these is pretty easy. Then, using sugar and bone meal, I can combine them in a machine buffer with a crafting card to make growth medium. This is yet another important crafting component. Well, I guess it's more like a machine fuel technically, but you get the point. Alright, let's finally get into Binnie's genetics. First up, we're going to need water and growth medium to make liquid growth medium. Combine that with wheat to make bacteria. To power all of this, I'm putting ethanol in a liquid fuel generator. Ethanol produces the maximum 32 EU per tick in the generator, and when converted to RF, it makes plenty of power. I should also mention that I did slightly edit the config. I made it so that the machines take 75% of the time to do their recipes than they would otherwise. These recipes are super slow. Some of them take over 10 minutes. I think I'm allowed to shave off just a little bit of that time, because I could tick accelerate if I wanted to with Project E. You know how I feel about Project E. I'm being extremely sparing with it. But yeah, then we just have to process the bacteria more. I'll get into that in a bit. So for a total of 5 incubators, you're going to need 3 more on top of the 2 we've already made. One of them makes polymerizing bacteria from bone meal, one makes bacteria vector from blaze powder, and the final one makes enzyme from bacteria and sugar. These are each different components for other genetics machines. All of these machines, like I said, are pretty slow, so you might want to make more than one. I'm being a little lazy and only making one of each, and that's going to be even more frustrating when I get to the gene pool. So, what is this gene pool, and why am I so afraid of it? Well, it takes anything with genetic traits, be it bees, saplings, flowers, or butterflies, and it decomposes them into raw DNA. Note that this is explicitly forestry or Binnie's saplings, not vanilla, or any other mod like Thaumcraft. With the exceptions of princesses and queens, all of these only produce 10 millibuckets of DNA. The machine will also consume ethanol and enzyme, so you'll have to constantly stock it with these things. You're going to end up needing a lot of DNA. Gee, if only we had some large quantity of item with genetic traits to it that we already have an automatic farm for, that we could conveniently retrofit to produce raw DNA. Now then, let's finally get to some genetic manipulation. To get started, I'm going to need an isolator. This will require some blank sequences and enzyme. Every time the isolator runs, it will extract one allele from your genetic host. That's the item you put in. There are many traits for each of the different types of things, and they'll vary depending on the species. Bees have pollination power, but saplings have fruit-bearing capabilities. And so each will keep running, taking, about 4 minutes per pass. 3 minutes for me, to extract one allele from one of those traits randomly. There's a 50% chance you get the allele you want, but if both alleles are the same, then it doesn't matter. It extracts this, puts it into the blank sequence, and then we have to polymerize it. By using polymerizing bacteria and raw DNA, we can keep copying the sequence we extracted from our genetic sample and amplify it, so that it's easier to tell what it is. That then gets sent into the sequencer, which tells us what the actual trait we uncovered is. It's not going to produce an item when the sequence is finally finished. Instead, it's going to just eject the blank basic sequence, and you can reuse that to start the process over. The gene information then gets sent to the genetic database for the player who placed the machine, and you'll have information on all of the things you've uncovered. There are a lot of genes, but obviously not all of them are useful. Also, just to outright state it, I'm using flowers as my source of raw DNA. Instead of turning them to dye, I just turn them into DNA. That easy. Another thing I should clear up is that if you are going to have trees pollinate with each other naturally, which is basically how it's going to happen most of the time, you're going to want a whole ton of bee houses. I think I have about 10 here, and they'll work on cross-pollinating things. I got very lucky in finding a plum sapling, as that was one of the side saplings I wanted to acquire. I do have a different type of tree I want specifically for its aesthetic, but plum is specific for its genetic traits. Thankfully, I can mass-produce plum saplings with a grafter, so I won't have to worry about losing my plum saplings when I'm scanning them. Plum trees have abnormally high yields of fruit. Orange trees don't have abnormally high yields of fruit, so I'm going to want to give orange trees that high yield from the plums. We'll get into how to inject these traits into trees later, but just know for now that I want plum trees. A hurdle in the path to that aesthetic tree I want is the myrtle ebony. You see, not all trees grow in a 1x1, and vanilla dark oak trees don't. With genetics though, we can modify that. If I isolate the sequenced genetic code for the DNA of this tree, and that I get the species of the tree saved, I can imprint its species onto other types of pollen. So I can have 1x1 trees from species that usually require 2x2 or 3x3. This might not be necessary or recommended if you're dealing with 2x2s, but for 3x3s you will probably get the trait you want from the saplings before you get 9 total. Do note that sometimes these 1x1 trees do not have many leaves, so you'll have to grow a bunch of them. You can only insert genes into the baby form of a particular product. This would be the larva for bees, pollen for trees, a serum for butterflies, not to be confused with the serum we're going to be using, or germlings for flowers. You can then throw this into the inoculator. Now we're going to need an actual serum. Craft an empty serum and go into your genetic database. Then click on the genetic sequence you want to copy and get polymerizing. Every time it completes one polymerization, it will effectively have one charge to convert one species, or whatever trait you want, into your sample. So if I were to take some hill cherry pollen, which is a 1x1 tree, and infuse it with the DNA of a myrtle ebony tree, the myrtle ebony tree will now copy all of the hill cherry's traits. This includes the cherries, though because of the low leaf production you're not going to get very many, and not every type of leaf supports every type of fruit. Like for oranges, you're going to want to stick with orange trees. And you guessed it, this process takes a while. 10 minutes normally, 7.5 for me. Now that I have myrtle ebony pollen, I can infuse it into a leaf. Note that I haven't quite yet fully converted it. This pollen only contains one allele, so I'm going to have to grow this tree and then insert a pollen into another one that has the half-breed, and then I can get one pure full myrtle ebony sapling. That grows in a 1x1. There. Now I've put this half pollen into this half tree, and I have a myrtle ebony sapling. It does still contain the trace DNA of the silver lime, so if bees are pollinating, they might pollinate with silver lime instead of myrtle ebony, but at least I have myrtle ebony trees now. Do note that raw mutated saplings that are produced by bees will always be pure, but if I modify the genetic traits of the bee, it will not make it pure. So you're still going to have to do a little bit of work to outbreed those undesirable genes. There, I did a bunch of crossbreeding off screen, and yes, I actually did the crossbreeding. You can see all the trees it took me to get there. The pomelos, the mandarins. I guess technically you can't see the lemon tree, but, you know. We finally have an orange tree. As I said, they're not a terribly large tree, and not all that many trees can support oranges. So now that we have this, we're going to want to increase that yield using that plum DNA. Then I can get to setting up a full farm. Some mutations require to be in a particular climate in order to occur. To get superior saplings, you need to be in a jungle, or some type of climate that replicates that. Relatively high moisture, relatively warm temperature. Well, it just so happens that I found the superior tree I was looking for out in the wild. I did set up the actual trees to perform the cross-pollination, even going as far as to use the tropical bees that poison you if you go near them, to do the pollination. This is where you'd get silky propolis naturally, by the way. But I guess if I'm lucky, I'm lucky. I told you how to do it. Now I get to use this lovely green wood. The planks are green, not the logs. I made a lumber mill for fun. It doesn't even give you more planks per log, but I made it for fun. Now to get on that orange orchard. Emerald electron tubes are the ones that tell it to pick fruit from trees. This means it won't harvest the trees raw, but instead just the fruit. I'm thinking this many orange trees should be enough, combined with that high yield stat I got from the plum. Do note that these saplings did take a few different inoculation processes to make. I had to combine orange DNA into the pollen to make it an orange tree, the high yield from the plum, and since I didn't have any of either of those species, I had to make it from hill cherry pollen. That's oranges out of the way though. Also, this farm is a 4x4, just so you know. You can look up the size of that online. That leaves cocoa beans, and did you really think I was just going to use the cocoa beans from the dye seeds? Obviously not. I'm using industrial foregoing. You can make some animal sewers and they'll collect sewage from the animals. You can then process that into fertilizer, and putting that in a plant fertilizer, it will fertilize the plants. Instead of the plant gatherer though, the plant interactor is what will harvest the cocoa beans, with the bonus that you don't have to replant the cocoa beans, they're already there. What can I say? I want to use as many mods as possible, so I'm using as many opportunities as I can get. Okay, I have to automate eggs. I'm feeling lazy. Considering how easy this is to do, I'm just gonna stick a bunch of chickens on a hopper and call it a day. I know, I'm being lame. I'm allowed to be lame just a little bit. Since this is the genetics episode, I might as well soup up my diamond bees as well. I'm not gonna get to it quite today, but I'd like to extract the traits from these imperial bees as they have fast productivity. This way I'll have the gene ready for later. For a shop that's gonna be selling chocolate-coated cookies, how about we coat the building in chocolate? Don't worry, the warp is going down, I'm not insane anymore, mostly. But I am going to build out of chocolate. This means I'll need a chocolate cow, obviously. I can get chocolate milk from it, craft that into chocolate bars, and then craft those into chocolate blocks. Weirdly, I can't eat the chocolate, I don't know why. But there you go, chocolate building blocks. There we are. I think I did a pretty good job building the exterior of this. It looks mostly like a Jaffa cake, I think. I've seen pictures online, but I've never seen one in real life. I took some creative liberties too. I thought the orange cave crystal looked pretty jammy, a translucent orange block, but it's not quite glass. So now I just need to fill it with all the machinery. I could craft oranges into jam directly, but it's much more efficient if I turn it into juice first. Then I can combine the juice with some sugar in a fluid crafter, which allows crafting with fluids instead of using a bucket, to make plenty of jam. Beyond that, it's not that complicated. I just used a bunch of ProjectRed pipes to craft everything, as well as ender chests. And there we have it, Jaffa cakes. That only took 914 hours of playtime. Alright, 914.4 hours. Obviously it took me that long because I spent all this time doing literally everything else in the mod pack. And no, we're not done here because there are still things I haven't done, like going to space. Maybe I'll do that next time. Let's go get Risa. I'm sure she'll be happy if I show her that I'm preserving her life's work. Maybe not exactly how she did it, but you know. So, how's it going? Oh. You could talk, please. Just come outside. Well, what do you think? Pretty cool, huh? Oh, I understand. Anything else I could do? Oh, unfortunately I can't do that. For my own safety, yours, and everyone else's, I need to refrain from the necromancy. I really wish I could help you more, but there's only so much I can do. It's a lot on me knowing there's not much I can do to help. Oh, well, I'm glad to have at least provided you with something. Thank you. I really appreciate it. That only went so well, but now's the moment of truth. It's time to see if I'm finally free of warp, and it looks like I am. Excellent. I feel better already. Well, thanks for watching. This has been Pick. I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.